Hello, everybody. Welcome to Crime Weekly News. This is a news segment that Derek and I are going to be doing every week. And basically, it's just going to be a shorter version of what we already do, but it's going to be when we're talking about crimes in the headlines. And Derek said something earlier that I wrote down because it was perfect. And he said, if you guys are talking about it, we want to be talking about it as well. When we do Crime Weekly, we're very limited to what we can discuss because we cover one case, usually from multiple parts, and there are different things happening every single day that Derek and I talk about amongst ourselves, or sometimes we'll post about it on Twitter or something like that, but we don't really have the time to go into a discussion about it with you guys or to get your take on what's happening. And there's a lot of stuff, a lot of crimes in the headlines lately that we've been wanting to discuss with you, but we just really don't have that opportunity. So we're going to do this once a week, and we hope that you join us and you join us in discussions in the comment section.
Yeah, there are cases, especially like the case we're going to talk about tonight, where also we're known for these deep dives. We're not able to do that with a case where there's very limited information out there that can be confirmed, right? There's a lot of information, but not necessarily from people who have any inside scoop on what really is happening. So we like to stay away from those for the time being because we don't want to put out false information either. But there's no reason we can't do this shorter segment where we talk about facts that have been confirmed, kind of serve, and that's why we're calling it Crime Weekly News. This is more from a journalistic angle as opposed to storytelling, where we're just going to kind of give you the facts. We're going to discuss them. I'll try to give you guys some insight as to what might be going on behind the scenes, and then we'll leave it and we'll update it week to week as we continue to do this. We're going to do it every week. This may be something that carries over to the next week as new information comes out, or it might be something completely new, something that's topical, something that's trending, something, again, that you guys are DMing us about where you're like, hey, are you going to cover it? Well, we can't cover this case like we would cover Crime Weekly yet. There's a lot of time that needs to go by before we would be able to do that, but there's no reason we can't cover cases like this that are happening in real time in this shorter segment.
Yeah, and you said it perfectly. I mean, you guys don't have the benefit that I have where when I see these things happening, I can call Derek or text him and be like, yo, what's your take on this? Like, what do you think about this? Now we can do that with him. I can do that live with you guys so that you guys get the benefit of his law enforcement knowledge and his behind the scenes knowledge and kind of just get to pick his brain about what he's thinking about these cases as they unfold. So I'm definitely very excited about diving into that today. And specifically today, we are doing an update on a case that I covered on my channel. I think everybody's been talking about this case, the murders of the 4 Idaho University students. So awful, especially given the fact that this happened right around the holidays, and we, heard from the families of these 4 young students, how devastated they were. And indeed, the statement they made, which was very impactful, we sent our kids to college and they never came home. And that's very hard as a parent. As anybody, even as a college student yourself, I think it can be very stressful to think that, something like this can happen without any warning, and it seems like something ripped out of a movie. But now, finally, we do have some movement in this case.
Yeah, I think this case is the same recipe for all the other ones that gain traction like this. Everyone kind of lives in this bubble for the most part where they see these tragedies, and it's not something that they really see themselves in, so it's okay to consume it. But when you have something like this, where you have 4 young individuals, from what we understand, sleeping in their house after a night out, being murdered in this way, it's tough to think, because think about how many college kids are out there right now that could have been them. And then from a parent perspective, you think, as you mentioned, all these parents all over the world who send their kids off to college thinking they're sending them there to make them better people, right? To become educated, to become more contributing members of society. And yet here we are, 4 innocent people who did nothing wrong being slaughtered, essentially, from what we've heard so far. It really brings it back to home. Now everyone's questioning, what they can do to better protect their loved ones, because if it can happen to them, it can happen to you. And I think that's why people are so interested in this case.
Yeah, and the 4 college students that we're talking about specifically was Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan. They were best friends. They were both 21. And then we have Xana Kernodle and her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin. They were both 20. As a very quick review of this case, in case anybody had missed it or is kind of new to this, the murders happened on November 13th, 2022. It's believed to have happened overnight. So after they came back from, as Derek said, a night out. And for a good long time, I feel like too long for the people who lived in this area, they just didn't know who did it. And there was a lot of kind of mixed information coming out. The police said, hey, we don't know who did it. We don't have anybody in custody, but we can tell you that nobody else is in danger. And that wasn't really good enough for the people who were living in Moscow, Idaho at the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, this is a crazy one. And I think with this case, the reason why we're willing to cover it today is because of the updates that have happened and how much insight we're getting into the alleged killer. Because there was a lot of information over the last few weeks that have gone out there. And this is no shade on anybody, but you see a lot of internet detectives, TikTok, Instagram, choose your platform. I don't care. They're trying to help. In most cases, some are doing it for their own personal reasons, but in many cases they're trying to help because they feel like law enforcement is going nowhere just because they're not explaining everything they're doing behind the scenes. But there was a lot of people in the circle of these victims that were being accused of possibly being involved. There were some videos released about the victims and showing the victims hours before their murders. And there's people in those videos where they're like, that guy looks shady. It could be him. We need to find out who he is. And come to find out, we're now in a position where the person who may be responsible for all 4 murders may have acted alone and was on no one's radar, and may not even have been connected to these people directly. We don't know. Again, this is all from what I'm hearing online and from what some of the news outlets are reporting, but may not be connected to them in any way, shape, or form. So it does, I think, serve as a lesson for all of us too, to not jump the gun on these things and to let information come out and to let law enforcement do their job. Because in many cases we cover a lot of cases on Crime Weekly because they're old cases that haven't been solved where police work was not the best. But you have to go into it giving them a shot. And from what I've heard from people I've spoken to, this is a 35-man department. They worked with the FBI on this. But from what I'm hearing, the police work that was done with some outside agencies, incredible work. Incredible work. And it's another case where it wasn't an obvious person who was involved. They actually had to do something here. It took some investigative prowess to get in there. Agents were involved as well. So if it turns out that it is what people are reporting, it's an incredible job, and it's an example of what law enforcement can do when people work together and use the science and technology available to them.
Yeah, I don't think anybody was stopping law enforcement from doing their job, certainly. And I don't think that the issue was that it didn't look as if they were doing anything. It was that mixed information was coming out initially, and apparently that had something to do with the police not being on the same page, not having a designated spokesperson at the time to kind of dole out this information. You had the medical examiner going on every damn show, running her mouth. So it wasn't like it was the internet sleuths who were like, oh, let's find something juicy here. Some of them, yes, but I think in general, everyone was like, what the hell is going on? I've never seen a medical examiner personally who performed autopsies on victims be on like television shows and giving interviews within days after performing the autopsies. That threw me for a loop. And she was like, there was so much blood, and she was giving all this information out. And then on one hand, the police are like so close-lipped, and then this medical examiner's here running her mouth and saying things that we wouldn't know had she not told us.
Yep.
It was very confusing and mixed messaging happening. So it kind of felt like, not that they weren't doing anything, just that they didn't know what the hell they were doing at first. Most likely because, as you said, it's a small department and they don't have a lot of violent crime in Moscow. They don't at all have a lot of violent crime. And
many, we were talking about this about another case. In many situations, if DNA is a factor in the case, they don't get results overnight. They will be expedited because of the circumstances. You could have a potential killer on the loose still in that area, so they want to identify him or her as quickly as possible. So yes, the results are expedited, but there is a process that they have to go through as far as taking the DNA from the crime scene, processing it, canceling out any potential people that were at the crime scene that could just be investigators or some type of CSI tech or cleaning crew, whatever it might be, cancel those people out, then try to see if the DNA they have is connected to anybody who's already entered into any of the databases that they have at their disposal. And then if not, expand that research and expand that search into genealogical databases outside of what's in the public sector, more in the private sector. So it takes time to get those results and then to track down the potential person connected to that DNA and to see if there's someone who's even a viable suspect. So it doesn't happen overnight, although we wish it would. And considering what they may have had to do, this actually still was pretty fast.
Yeah, it was about a month and a half. from when the murders happened to when an arrest was made. I agree. Very, very fast. We were worried that kind of nobody was ever going to be, taken into custody for this. And it turns out that the suspect, because once again, innocent until proven guilty, we
Of
don't
course.
know if this person is responsible or connected. At this point, he's been arrested. He was arrested on December 30th, 2022, and his name is Brian Christopher Koberger. He's 28 years old, and he's originally from Albertsville, Pennsylvania. I've never heard of Albertsville before, so I'm sure it's a small town, but what I gather is it's in the Poconos region of Pennsylvania. Now, the interesting thing about Brian Koberger is what he sort of was passionate about, what he was interested about. And from what I can tell from reading things that people who have known him since he was young have said, he's kind of always been interested in this stuff. And it seems like his passion was criminology, serial killers, criminal justice, stuff like that. So at the time that these murders were committed, he was a criminal justice and criminology PhD student at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. He lived on campus there. He was also a teacher's assistant for a course that was being taught there. So he also had an office on campus. And this campus is just 8 miles from the Moscow crime scene. That's just a 15-minute drive from the campus to the rental home where those 4 students were found stabbed to death on November 13th. From what I can tell, according to the Washington State University Chancellor Elizabeth Chilton, Brian had just completed his first semester as a PhD student in WSU's criminal justice program, but he had previously studied criminal justice at DeSales University, which is located in Center Valley, PA. And it was here at DeSales University that Brian studied under Catherine Ramsland. And Catherine Ramsland is a forensic psychologist, a renowned forensic psychologist who's written 68 books, including titles such as How to Catch a Killer, The Psychology of Death Investigations, and The Mind of a Murderer. And even before that, Brian went to Northampton Community College in Albertsville in 2018. And at that point, he was a psych major. And also, we were talking about Catherine Ramsland earlier because we were kind of discussing this before we turned the camera on. And you told me that who was it? The BTK's daughter just recently today went on social media and said that Catherine Ramsland was responsible for writing the book about her father.
Yeah, it was actually Brian Enton from News Nation who was interviewing her. And she said that when she found out it was the same professor, she had chills over it.
Yeah, so this woman very invested in this kind of world of criminology, studying serial killers, things like that. And it seemed that Brian was as well. And I also want to say what I find to be interesting and very disturbing is it looks like Brian was employed part-time by the Pleasant Valley School District as a security officer for several years up until 2021. So he did that sort of when he wasn't in school, when he was home on breaks, things like that. He worked as a security officer. And that's kind of, given what he's being accused of, concerning.
Yeah, no doubt. To have this background and to be in that type of profession, it does give him a different insight into how to conduct a crime like this and potentially get away with it. And then to think that this individual who this could have been his first crime, or it could have been a series of events, that this is the final time when it's gotten enough notoriety that he's been caught. So this is going to be, we're at page 1 of this book, because I think we're going to learn a lot about Brian and his background. And I know you have more stuff to discuss here as far as some of the facts, but I feel like we're going to find a situation where there are some people who get into the criminal justice field because they want to stop people like this. So in order to stop them, you have to learn how they work and how they tick. Then there are other people who are secretly fascinated by them and envy them.
Yeah.
They can't come out and say that, but there's a different reason as to why they're going to these classes and going and learning about these people, as opposed to how you or I might learn about them. So they exist, and there's more Brians out there. I can tell you that right now. And unfortunately, they're getting knowledge that may help them avoid apprehension. And there's no way to really differentiate those people in class. I'm sure if teachers see something that's completely obvious, they would report it. But in most cases, they're just regular students amongst us. And yeah, they might be a little weird, a little quirky, but Is that enough to go report it to authorities? No, probably not. So it's a tough situation because they are getting some insight into how these monsters worked and what were their motivations, and in a lot of ways, some of them are inspired by that.
Well, I will say, I'm fascinated by the minds, of
Of
these
course.
criminals, but not like, oh, no, I wish I could be a criminal. Like, how can I be the best criminal ever? Let me learn from the masters. Definitely not. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean, can we say that he learned from their mistakes because he wasn't on the run in a month and a half? Obviously, he had some more learning to do. At this point, he's been obsessed.
I'm hoping this is a common trend because from what we're hearing, it was probably DNA that caught this guy. And I think some of the back in the day that this wasn't as prevalent, it wasn't as good, and it was easier to get away with it if you weren't caught on camera. Now with DNA and the amounts needed to catch someone and all the databases available, and now it's not even a matter of you being entered, but just a family member of yours being entered in these genealogists and what they're able to do. It's a different world, and I'm hoping this is a trend where we're going to get to a point where if you're at a crime scene, unless you're in a plastic bubble, there's going to be some type of DNA footprint left behind. So you're going to have some answers. You're going to have some questions to answer one way or another. I'm hoping 10 years from now, this is like automatic in every case, but it's starting to seem like it's getting harder and harder to get away with crimes like this, especially if he was injured in any way while murdering these four people.
And I mean, we've talked about this multiple times, the amount of times that these poor kids were stabbed,
Yeah.
the ferocity, the violence. You're going to see that the person doing the stabbing is often going to cut themselves or graze themselves with the knife just because, for the lack of being sensitive about it, because I'm just going to come right out. When the blood starts flowing, things get slippery. And I don't think that somebody who has studied crime for the better part of a decade understands what it's like to be in that situation, hands-on with these victims and their blood in front of you, and you're trying to have these precise, stabs, and it's just not happening because it didn't go the way you thought it would in your mind. It's like people like say those who can't do teach. Well, this student thought he knew the ins and outs of what it would take to be a criminal. And I think that the study that he conducted when he was a student at DeSales also has something to do with his confidence, if he is the one who committed these crimes, his confidence in committing these crimes, because it looks like he participated in a research project with his college. And this research project apparently sought to understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making when committing a crime. So Brian's job was to ask ex-convicts to participate, and then on behalf of the study, he would ask them questions such as, how did you approach your victim or target? How did you prepare for your crime? How did you travel to the location of your crime? How did you enter the location of the crime? Did you struggle with or fight the victim? These are questions that you're basically saying, like, tell me how you committed this crime step by step. And it's unsettling, to say the least. And I mean, we also see, when you're looking a little bit further back, Brian Kohlberger gives me the sense of somebody who maybe felt disenfranchised when he was younger, maybe felt pushed aside, not given the respect that he deserved, somebody who was maybe above average intelligence and just didn't feel respected and sort of looked down on everybody else. But friends of Brian's from high school, they said that basically he was like kind of overweight, but down to earth and normal. And then all of a sudden, one summer he left school and he came back and he'd lost a ton of weight and he was basically like a deck. And then it says that his high school years were also sort of hallmarked by bullying, but depending on who you ask, it was him being bullied. But other people say, it was kind of him doing the bullying. So, for instance, one of his friends, Thomas Arntz, he said that Kohlberger would point out people's flaws and insecurities to distract from his own flaws and insecurities. So Thomas Arntz said, quote, he did that to me all the time. He would go after my intelligence. He would basically insinuate that I'm kind of slow-witted, that I'm forgetful, and that I lack the intelligence to be his friend, end quote. It looked like this happened kind of the summer between sophomore and junior year. And it also seemed that through high school, or at least at the end of high school, Brian Kohlberger was struggling with a heroin addiction. So that also could probably contribute to the drastic weight loss that his friends were seeing when he left for a summer and came back. Heroin will do that to you. But additionally, as far as his teachers go, like his teachers in high school said he was great. You know, he was passionate about criminology. He was a good kid. He was never in any major trouble. He didn't have many friends. One of his teachers said, I thought he was just going to become a police officer or a correctional officer because he was so interested in this criminology, and he would go and watch movies or police shows, and then come back and ask her questions and like pick her brain about it. One of the students that he attended class with at Washington State University, so remember the university he was attending when these murders were committed, he said that Brian seemed more interested in the thought process of criminals while they committed their crimes and less interested in like the social factors that might lead people to commit crimes. It seemed like Brian Koberger was of the mindset that some people were just going to break the law, and some people were sort of destined to break the law. And this student also said that Brian was the black sheep of the class. He would often take very contrarian viewpoints and get into arguments with his peers, who were often women. In fact, I guess he upset one female student so much she got up and left the class. And then he, like I said, was a teacher's assistant, right? And people said he was a really hard teacher's assistant. Like he kind of felt very much like he knew everything, and he would give really low grades. And when the class complained about his low grades, he would sort of defend why he had given the lower grades. But then later in the fall, around the time of the murders, it seemed like he was all of a sudden giving better grades and also less critique. And then another student who took 4 classes with Brian during the semester that the murders took place, he said that Brian continued to attend classes until the end of the semester. So if Brian is the one who did these murders, he committed these murders, went back to school, and kept going to classes. And they even talked about this murder in one of their classes because obviously they're criminology students. And this student said that Brian did not mention or contribute to the conversation about the murders. And they were released from class early after the murders to get home when it was still light. And Brian was in those classes with them, which is, odd. And then we have another, like an owner of a brewing company in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, who remembered that Brian would come into the bar sometimes and sit by himself. But apparently this bar also had a system. So when a customer's ID is scanned, the notes will pop up on the screen and other employees can see them. And basically the notes were like, hey, this guy makes creepy comments. Keep an eye on him. He'll have 2 or 3 beers and then just get a little too comfortable. And the things he was asking the female employees and the female customers were like, oh, who are you here with? Where do you live? What's your work schedule like? Kind of like creepy stuff. And then if the female would refuse to interact or wouldn't answer his questions, he would make like disparaging remarks to them. Like he called one bartender a bitch because she just wouldn't answer his questions. And so the owner, Jordan Serlinek, eventually had to go up to Brian Koberger and say like, hey, Brian, welcome back. We love that you're back here, but like, I just hope that you're going to be respectful this time. We're not going to have any more issues. And he said that Brian Koberger was completely taken aback. He was shocked that Jordan was saying this. And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. You must have me confused. But then Brian Koberger only had 1 beer that night. He left the brewery and he never came back. And I think that says plenty about him. So what do you think about all of this? The fact that he's performing this study where he's getting like insight into the mind of criminals, where he's very obsessed with the mind of criminals, where he's in all these criminology classes, and he's also not talking about the murders in his classes after the fact.
Yeah, I think it's what I was kind of saying earlier, where you have some people who are looking at it because they want to try to prevent this in the future. And then you have some people who are interested in the thought process, the mindset as to why they carry it out. And maybe even though he's not acknowledging it publicly, he's empathizing with them. A lot of their viewpoints on certain things, these serial killers, he may be secretly agreeing with them. And there is probably something there where you talked about some of his behavior where he has this resentment towards women, maybe because he feels like he's not seen by them and therefore he resents them and he has a problem with them, which may give us some insight into the motive behind these killings. We may find that out down the road. But overall, it's like I said, not to sound like, I'm repeating myself here, but you do have individuals throughout this country who are fascinated by true crime or are interested in taking classes like this because of some other reason than what most people are looking at it for, which is, again, to protect themselves and to prevent it from happening from others. Unfortunately, and I thought about this, I didn't know if it was a student or an adult, but it was 100% certainty that whoever did this was associating with others and in conversations with others about the Idaho murders, and the people didn't know that the person sitting next to them was the person responsible. It was a thought going through my head that clearly this person is probably not hiding out in the woods somewhere, and they're probably walking amongst us having conversations about these cases as if they're just a spectator like everybody else, which is a crazy thing to think. But I don't think anybody was under the false impression that this person did this and just disappeared off the face of the earth. They're obviously hiding in plain sight for the most part.
Yeah, what it looks like is if this is who did it, if Brian Koberger is the person who did it.
We have nothing to prove 100%. Everyone's picking out things now, even the stuff you said so far. It could mean something, or it could just be he's another weirdo in a bar, which, again, a very common thing.
Well, it looks like if he's the one who committed these murders, he did it. He sped away, went back to school, finished out the semester, and then went home for the Christmas holidays, at which point he was followed there to Pennsylvania by law enforcement. And that is, I believe, and it hasn't been confirmed, but it does say a source close to law enforcement says that they did track him down by familial DNA. And I think it also had something to do with the car that he was driving. It was a white Hyundai Elantra. That's the same color and model of car that was seen in the vicinity of the murders in November. Apparently somebody saw a car speeding away around 3:45 in the morning, things like that. And so they basically did search warrants at his apartment on campus, his office on campus. They arrested him, but they watched him for 4 days before they did that. And I think that's interesting. And one of the guys, the local guys, one of the Pennsylvania police officers said that every time Brian went to the grocery store in those 4 days, he wore gloves. So it was as if he was trying to not leave his fingerprints, as if maybe he thought that he could be being followed.
Mm-hmm. Remember we talked about this previous cases, leaving a cigarette butt behind.
Yeah. But he should know that he should have known that he probably cut himself. If he left DNA, we have to assume it was blood or something like that. So he would have had to have.
No, it could be. Even think about this. You have 4 people in the apartment, 4 victims. It could be as simple as DNA skin cells underneath the fingernails of one of the victims while they're struggling, right? Just scratching of the skin, not even cutting him, but just the scratching of his skin causing DNA skin cells to be under their fingernails because all their fingernails were clipped, I'm sure. It could also be you're struggling, you grab the offender by the hair or something like that, and hair fibers fall onto the ground. Now, you do need sometimes you need the root of the hair to actually do DNA, but with mitochondrial DNA, you don't any longer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So just his hair falling on, if he wasn't completely prepared for this, where he covered his hair, wore gloves, things like that, even if he did all that, his skin would still be exposed to some degree, and just a scratching of the face, it could end up we might find out. It could be blood. That's the simple answer, right? But it could also be one of the victims that solved their own case just by fighting back. We will find out, but it doesn't necessarily have to be something overt. It could be something that they had to wait for the autopsy, and maybe that's why it took a little longer, where it wasn't until they examined the DNA under the fingernails of one of the victims, or hair fibers found on one of the beds or in the apartment that didn't belong to anyone they know, where they finally got to kind of go down that rabbit hole.
And I was concerned about that too, because this was known to be a party house. It's a college campus, apartment, lots of people in and out. So you've really got to distinguish all those DNA samples and see okay, we have Brian Koberger's DNA, but how do we know he didn't go to one of their parties? How do you really distinguish that? So that's going to take time. So once again, this was very, very speedy considering all the things that they had to go through. Now, they still have not located the murder weapon. And, the probable cause affidavit for his arrest is said to be sealed, and it's going to remain sealed until he appears in an Idaho court. At this point, law enforcement has not publicly confirmed a motive or even said whether or not Brian Koberger knew the victims. But I did read an article in Business Insider today that said a source who's a cousin of one of Brian Koberger's childhood classmates claimed that Brian allegedly tracked the 4 victims' cell phones for weeks before the killings. So if that is true, then this does look almost like a thing where he's trying to make a name for himself. He picked out these victims ahead of time and said, this is going to make a splash. This is going to be all over, which it was. And this is how I even if I get caught, I win, right? Because now my name goes down in history, like Ted Bundy and all of these other serial killers who have done these these crazy crimes. It looks like the motive to me, like you said, I think you said earlier, like maybe he saw one of the girls at a bar and they rejected him, but also it could just be, let me do something that is so horrible that, everybody has to talk about it. That's so dramatic that everybody has to talk about it.
Yeah, it's I'm not giving again innocent until proven guilty. Seems like this guy might be an intelligent guy for the most part.
He's very smart. As far as we know, he's very smart.
Very educated. And so this is purely speculation, but I almost feel like it's a mix just based on what we heard. First and foremost, let me address something you said. I know I'm talking about skin cells and hair fibers. If I was a betting man, I would say it was blood. And the reason I would say it was blood is because of what you mentioned. If it were skin cells or hair fibers, it could belong to a lot of people, but having someone's blood in there that doesn't live there, that's more indicative of a struggle, of a fight. It would be quick to rule out those potential people. So that might be part of the reason that this was expedited. But back to what you were saying, if I had to speculate, I feel like this individual, it looks like we have some video of the victims. It doesn't appear that they were with Brian that night. So this happened, this was a surprise attack. So there had to be some type of premeditation before it. How long? If this information is true, well, it must have been weeks. But what's interesting to me is this guy being so smart and learning from so many other offenders in the past. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you're going to go in there with a knife and that's how you're going to kill these people, 4 people, it's a tough situation to control, to get the outcome you want. And a lot of these offenders, you will find, try to control their situations and have all their I's dotted and T's crossed. So I don't know if something happened that spun him over the edge where he just got really upset that night, and that's why he decided to act when he did. And it does seem like maybe it wasn't completely prepared properly because you're allowing yourself to leave in your vehicle. There's cameras there. Is this how you would do it if you had a ton of time to think about it? So I'm really fascinated by this case, just like everybody else. But I know sources are saying it's familial. It's almost got to be. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, but it almost has to be
familial DNA.
Familial DNA, because this guy doesn't appear to have any connection to them. And he has no previous criminal history. He was stopped twice in Indiana with his dad, but this guy's not on anybody's radar. And yet they were able to track him all the way back to the Poconos. I can tell you that if that's the case, we're going to find out that there were more people than just law enforcement involved, probably some genetic genealogists who got into it and were able to use the DNA, enter it into one of these private databases, and were able to find relatives of this individual, and they were able to track him down and then compare it to the DNA. There's more to it. Again, you said the vehicle, he might have some wounds on him that were during the sign of struggle. Overall, it looks like if this is the guy, it was incredible police work. Now they have to make sure they do the right things, because although they may have the guy, you will speak to this more than I will. There's many times where although it might be the right guy, the police investigation is conducted horribly, and therefore the person should get off because of how poorly the investigation was conducted. So let's hope if this is the guy, things are done the right way, legally, and we find out what exactly happened. And maybe once they get him into a corner, if he is the guy, maybe he takes ownership of it. But it sounds like from what you were saying earlier, he intends on fighting this and he's innocent. So we're in for a long road, I think.
Yeah, so he's going to be extradited back to Idaho.
Right.
He at this point, he's being represented by Jason LaBar, who's the chief public defender of Monroe County in Pennsylvania. He's simply representing Brian in the extradition, not in the murder case. But this guy, Jason LaBar, says that Brian is shocked that he's been implicated in this, and he's completely eager to prove his innocence. He's been very aware, calm, and I did hear something where it appears that when he was arrested, Brian had asked the police, like, am I the only one you arrested, or have you arrested anybody else? And people have been kind of going back and forth on this. Is he saying that because he wasn't alone? It's been really obviously debated how one person would be able to do
control
this
the
to
whole
4
situation.
people. Yeah, control, like you said, by himself. Or is he saying this because of his expertise in this area and he's trying to throw out like red herrings and make police and law enforcement believe that there was somebody else involved when it was just him and confuse the situation?
That's the angle I'm going, by the way. If this is the guy, that's why I'm doing it. And also, if they are pulling in multiple people, it weakens their case against him.
Mm-hmm.
But it looks like
so
they're
you think he
focused on
did it alone if he did it?
If he did it, I think he did it alone. And just for the sake of this conversation,
I agree.
Based on the fact that they have to have a judge sign off on this isn't just speculative. They have enough evidence here to get a warrant for his arrest for murder. And so I can tell you it's not just, well, we saw his car leaving the scene. They got a lot more that we're going to learn about. And just on the surface, from what we know, just very limited, it does appear that this guy's got some problems as far as being able to show he's not involved in any way, shape, or form. But we will see. Won't be the first time. We'll have to let the judicial system take its course. I will say final thoughts from me, and we may cover this more next week because there's going to be new information that comes out. And again, this is more newsworthy. Whatever's coming out, we'll let you guys know about it in case you haven't heard about it. But I do want to say on the surface, if this is the guy, it's not going to bring him back. But I've already seen some interviews with parents and the relief and their ability to have celebrations of life about their kids now that they feel that the person who did this is behind bars and not able to attend these events and get that sick gratification out of it.
Yeah.
I hope this is for their sake. This is the guy. And if it is, I hope they can start the process of grieving and believing
healing.
that the person responsible for it has been found. And we will see. We'll see what happens. But I can already see a change in demeanor from some of the parents that have done interviews where you can see that relief on their face. And as a dad, I'm happy for them.
I do get I agree with you. I think Brian did this alone. If he did it allegedly, he gives me lone.
Yeah, we got to be careful. We're news. This is Crime Weekly News.
Yeah, Crime Weekly News. He gives me lone wolf mentality personally. He doesn't seem to be somebody who has really strong friends. Kind of seems like he alienates himself from others because he has a superiority complex. But I do have one thing to ask you before we go. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, which is obvious, but then 1 felony burglary charge. What is up with that?
It would only be 1.
It means he took something, right?
Nope. Burglary, well, it could be. It could be breaking and entering, as referred to in Rhode Island, is just crossing the threshold of a home without consent. So the minute you cross the threshold, whether it's a doorway or a window, that is considered breaking and entering. You don't actually have to take something. Now, the statutes are different in every state, and I haven't researched, how it would be in Moscow, how it would be in that state. But in Idaho, it might be the statute itself might be slightly different. But I feel very confident in saying the process of entering the house with or without force. So, for example, if a window's open and unlocked, if you go into that window without consent, you don't have a reasonable right to be there. That is still considered breaking and entering by law.
Well, he didn't get charged with breaking and entering. He got charged with burglary.
So my point being, the statute might be slightly different. The way that it's I can tell you this. In Rhode Island, it's not called murder. It's called felony assault with death resulting. So every state refers to these certain actions differently. So again, without researching burglary statute in Idaho, which it seems like you're looking up right now, we have a breaking and entering statute, which is the process of entering a home without consent and taking belongings or not taking belongings. But either way, just the mere action of entering that home without consent, with or without force, if they can prove that, you would be found guilty of it.
Okay, so burglary in Idaho is defined as any person who enters any house, room, apartment, tenement, store, et cetera,
Yep.
With intent to commit any theft or any felony is guilty of burglary.
So
that means he had an intent to commit theft or burglary. I guess I'm just I'm confused of why they threw that in.
Does it say any felony?
With intent to commit any theft or any felony, I see, is guilty of burglary.
So the felony would be the murder.
So why even bother if you're charging him with felony murder? Why throw the burglary in there?
You stack them on there. You stack them on there. Absolutely. You hit him with everything that would be viable under the actions he carried out, and it would obviously only be 1 count because it would be whoever the renter or rentee of that apartment was, or the owner of the building. Whoever's name is on the lease, they are the complainant, even if they're deceased. So you would only have 1 count of it. So again, the intent of committing a felony when you go in there, you don't even actually have to do it. The fact that you went in, you could go in there. For example, I go into your house. I walk around your house without consent. I pick up the PlayStation. I'm looking at it. I decide I'm not going to take it and I leave. Am I not guilty of breaking and entering? You bet your ass I still am. So it's just the intent of going in there, and they're going to have to prove that. Well, in this case, it would be simple because there were 4 murders. So
Right.
obviously he went there with the intent of
To
taking
commit a felony.
And also he may have removed something from that home that could have implicated him in the crime, which would even strengthen that charge. But it's probably more simple. He went there with the intent to murder.
Well, that's what I'm curious about. Did he remove something which they then later found during the search warrants in his apartment or in his office at the college, which then strengthened their claim that it was Brian Kohlberger who was in the apartment in Moscow that night? Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
But if we find out he didn't, the fact that he entered the home illegally, it would still qualify under that statute, even if he didn't take anything out. In this case, the felony would be the murder.
Okay. Well, that's all we have for you tonight. I know that there's more to discuss, and honestly, Derek and I could continue talking about this for another hour because there is so much to discuss. But we want to know now what you think about this. We're handing it off to you. So let us know in the comments what you think about this new arrest in the Idaho murders case that, has only been really, unsolved for a month and a half. But honestly, it's felt like a lifetime because it was such a traumatic, horrible, terrorizing thing to happen. It really felt like a movie. It felt like it wasn't real life. So let us know what you think about this new arrest, what you think about Brian Kohlberger, what you think his interest in criminology had to do with these murders, if he is the one who committed them. Let us know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. If you're here from listening to us on the audio podcast, these quicker videos are going to be on YouTube only. So if you listen to the audio version and you just pop into YouTube once in a while, make sure you're subscribed so that you will get notifications when we post these Crime Weekly news segments.
Absolutely. And just a disclaimer, I know I don't have to say it for everybody. We're recording this on Monday, which is, I'll put the date right out there for you. It's January 2nd. So by the time this goes out, we're going to get it out as fast as possible with very light editing just to get it out nice and polished. You may not see this till Wednesday. So if anybody in the comments is going, well, there's already been 7 updates since this video, please politely remind them that this isn't the same day that you're seeing the video. So we're expecting this case to continue to evolve, and I'm sure some of this information might be outdated by the time you see it, and that's why we'll have a follow-up next week on Crime Weekly News. That's all I got. I just want to put that out there for the people who are going to try to poke holes in Crime Weekly News. Right, we're all about journalistic integrity here.
Thanks for being here. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button if you like it, and share it if you think it's worth sharing. And we will see you next week here on Crime Weekly News. Goodbye.
Bye.
Good night.